The Supreme Court agreed to hear a case challenging Donald Trump's order purporting to ban birthright citizenship, notwithstanding the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, which I'm going to put on the screen now. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. The Supreme Court is going to hear whether those words are going to be interpreted just as they have been interpreted for 150 years. Every single district court that has heard this question has said yes. That is what the 14th Amendment reads. And here to say more is Cody Wofsy, Deputy Director of the ACLU's Immigrant Rights Project. Cody, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Just to start things off, what's your comment on the granting of cert here? That the fact that the Supreme Court's agreed to hear this, should anyone read into that? Did they have to hear this case?
They didn't have to, but there was no real doubt that they were going to take this case up. This is the second trip to the Supreme Court on this issue just this year. And earlier in the year, in the CASA versus Trump case, the court essentially said, we want to hear the merits of this as soon as possible. So it's not surprising that the court took it up, and we are looking forward to making our arguments to the court and ultimately prevailing.
As a matter of fact, didn't Justice Barrett, in her opinion, in that CASA case, essentially say that the government has to try to challenge this case on the merits, that not the kind of procedural maneuver that they did the first time around?
Yeah, that's right. I think that the discussion during the oral argument, and you saw that again in the opinion, was bring the merits up to this court and the Supreme Court will decide.
I'm going to read a quote from your colleague, R.T. Cody, who had mentioned, even though this was expected and folks anticipated this would happen, this is what R.T. Cody said, quote, "It's deeply troubling that we must waste precious judicial resources relitigating what has been settled constitutional law for over a century." Can you say more about that? That this has been something, the 14th Amendment came in the shadow of the Civil War. And we've tell a little bit about the history of that, where the Supreme Court has actually heard this issue before.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, the history goes back even further. From the very beginning of the United States as a country, citizenship has been about people who were born here. That's a rule we actually inherited from English common law, because obviously the states were originally English colonies. Now, there was some debate about that idea, particularly when it came to enslaved people and their descendants. And so in the very shameful decision of Dred Scott, the Supreme Court broke with this idea of citizenship by birth in the United States when it came to Black Americans. That was a big part of why the Civil War was fought. It was one of the precipitating events. And so in the aftermath of the Civil War, the folks in Congress who had, militated in favor of freedom for enslaved people said, we need to make sure that birthright citizenship, this ancient common law rule, is forever protected in the Constitution. And that's exactly why you see it in the 14th Amendment. Now, you flash forward a few decades, there was, again, resistance to this idea of universal birthright citizenship. And that came to the Supreme Court in the case of Wong Kim Ark, who is the child born in the United States to Chinese immigrants. At that time, folks who were Chinese could not become U.S. citizens. And so the arguments were made that, again, birthright citizenship doesn't apply to this category of people. And the Supreme Court could not have more emphatically rejected that idea in Wong Kim Ark. It said that the 14th Amendment applies to everyone with only this sliver of an exception, essentially for the children of ambassadors, because they are under the kind of immunity of their parents as ambassadors. For everybody else, if you're born in the United States, you are a US citizen, full stop. So I agree. We are here to relitigate issues that the Supreme Court has already decided. But the text of the Constitution is clear, the history is clear, the precedent is clear. And so that's why, while none of this should be happening in the first place, we are supremely confident at the end of the day we will prevail in this case.
As I mentioned a little bit earlier, every court that has heard this issue so far on the lower level has been unanimous. The 14th Amendment says what the 14th Amendment says. Do you have an actual count? There are a lot of cases out there. How many times has this been litigated so far?
Yeah, obviously there's cases going back, well over a century on these issues, but since the executive order came out, 4 separate United States district judges have agreed that this is flatly unconstitutional, and then 2 courts of appeals have likewise agreed this is unconstitutional. Not one single judge has said, actually, I think that this executive order can stand. So again, the law is clear on this. Nevertheless, the Supreme Court is going to hear these issues. It's going to decide this case. And what I think the outcome will be is we will finally put to rest some of these very troubling ideas that some people should be excluded from citizenship based on the immigration status of their parents. That idea has been bubbling up, especially in far right anti-immigrant circles for decades. And this case will once and for all put that to rest and confirm that the Constitution means what it says.
I want to speak a bit about the case that made it up to the Supreme Court. It was Barbara v. Trump. Now it will be Trump v. Barbara. And the Barbara is the pseudonym of a woman who was a citizen of Honduras, now lives in New Hampshire. She apparently, I have the complaint in front of me that was filed. She was expecting a child in October of this year, and she had spoken. I went up to the lower court hearing on this in New Hampshire, and one of the things that was mentioned is the uncertainty of parents and soon-to-be parents. What would happen if such an order were in place, and the uncertainty around their children. What has it been like for Barbara and other people like her?
Yeah, when the Supreme Court's initial decision came out in the CASA case, which sort of opened the door to the possibility of this order being enforced against some people while litigation proceeded, we got just dozens and dozens of phone calls from families who were impacted by this order from around the country, telling us we're scared, we're confused. Do I need to move to a different state to give birth? Should I try and induce my pregnancy sooner, even though that might impact my health, in order to escape the effects of this? And I think that's just the tip of the iceberg. If this order were to go into effect, it would mean stripping away citizenship from tens of thousands of children and tens of thousands of more every month, every year as we move forward. It would mean denying people access to critical health insurance, early life nutrition, and eventually just all the rights and privileges and duties that come along with citizenship: voting, serving on juries, being a full member of American society. And you can imagine what it would mean if your citizenship turned on the immigration status of your parents. Well, then all sorts of folks are going to have their citizenship questioned in all kinds of different contexts, and even people not impacted within the terms of the order would have their citizenship and ultimately their belonging in this country questioned. It'd be an invitation for discrimination, and it would establish this subclass of people in the United States, even though they were born here, have never set foot in another country, who would not be considered citizens and would be exposed to deportation and all the other harms that are exposed, that non-citizens are exposed to. So it's an incredibly troubling possible scenario if this were to go in effect. And I think even more fundamentally, it's really an attack on who we are as a country. Birthright citizenship, this idea that people born here, no matter who their parents are citizens and are equal to everyone else, is absolutely fundamental to the Constitution as it emerged from the Civil War. And the idea that we're going to wind that back now is frightening. That said, as I already explained, we have every expectation that we are going to win this case, and that actually at the end of the day, what we're going to see is a reinforcing of that fundamental American value and a re-enshrining of it in Supreme Court precedent, really putting this to bed once and for all.
Thank you so much, Cody, for your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And for folks who want to find out more of the reporting on this and other topics, visit www.allrisenews.com. That's www.allrisenews.com. And to watch other videos like this, subscribe now to Legal AF.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.